Racist restaurant owner kicks out black couple. Realizes too late who they are. Julian Blake straightened his tie, glancing at his reflection in the car window before turning to his wife, Lauren. She looked stunning in an elegant, emerald dress that complemented her radiant smile and the spark in her eyes. Tonight was their 15th wedding anniversary, and he wanted everything to be perfect. They had been through many challenges together, and celebrating this milestone felt like a testament to their strength and love. As they walked up to Stanton's Grill, an upscale restaurant known for its traditional ambience and gourmet menu, Julian felt the pride of having worked hard to afford such luxuries. For the occasion, they had chosen one of the finest establishments in town, a place where many people from the city gathered for memorable occasions. Julian and Lauren had heard wonderful things about the restaurant and were eager to experience it for themselves. Inside, the restaurant was bustling with laughter and conversation. Tables were set with gleaming silverware. Soft music played in the background, and servers moved gracefully through the crowd, delivering plates of beautifully prepared food. Julian felt the evening couldn't have been better. But as they approached the hostess stand, they noticed the hostess casting a sideways glance at George Stanton, the restaurant's owner, standing nearby. George's eyes landed on them, and a slight frown creased his face. Without a word, he turned away, speaking softly to the hostess. "Good evening. We have a reservation under Blake," Julian said, smiling as he looked at the hostess. She hesitated, glancing nervously at George, then back at them, her forced smile faltering. "Ah, I'm afraid it might be a while for your table." Julian and Lauren exchanged glances, wondering if this was just a minor setback or the start of something more. Julian and Lauren stood by the hostess stand, trying to ignore the growing discomfort they both felt. Lauren's smile faded as she noticed the way people around them stole glances, eyes filled with curiosity or, worse, disapproval. She reached for Julian's hand, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. "I'm sure it's just a small wait," he whispered, though he felt uneasy himself. He had made the reservation weeks ago, and the hostess's evasiveness was more than a little suspicious. Minutes ticked by as the couple watched other patrons being promptly seated. Their names were called, tables were cleared, but Julian and Lauren remained standing by the entrance, nearly forgotten. George Stanton, meanwhile, lurked near the bar, watching them with thinly veiled contempt. Julian noticed him whispering to a passing server, who then shot the couple a quick, dismissive glance before heading off in the other direction. "I don't know, Julian," Lauren murmured, her voice tense. "Do you think it's worth waiting around? Maybe we should go somewhere else." Julian shook his head slowly. "We have every right to be here, Lauren. We're not letting anyone spoil our night," he replied firmly. "Besides, I want to see if they actually intend to seat us." Just then, George approached, his hands clasped behind his back, feigning politeness. "Good evening. I understand you're waiting for a table." "Yes, we have a reservation for two," Julian replied, meeting George's gaze with calm determination. George forced a smile. "Well, I'm not sure if this is the right place for everyone. Perhaps a more casual establishment might be more suitable." His tone was dripping with condescension. Lauren's grip on Julian's hand tightened as she took in the blatant dismissal. But Julian's face remained stoic. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Julian drew a steadying breath, letting George's words settle, while Lauren held back tears of frustration. He wasn't about to let this man ruin their night. He looked George squarely in the eyes, his calm tone belying the anger simmering beneath. "With all due respect, we've made a reservation," Julian said firmly. "And I'd appreciate it if you honored that reservation just as you would for any other guests." George's forced smile faded, replaced by a look of barely concealed irritation. He shifted his stance, as though measuring Julian's words. "I understand, Mr. Blake. However, as I mentioned, we cater to a specific clientele here. Sometimes expectations differ." Lauren's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and she looked away, clearly wanting to leave. Julian gently placed his hand on her shoulder, calming her. "This isn't about expectations, Mr. Stanton. We simply want to enjoy a quiet dinner to celebrate our anniversary, as we have every right to do." A few other guests nearby had begun to notice the exchange, their curious glances growing sharper. George cleared his throat, straightening up as if in an attempt to regain authority. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone he'd already decided didn't belong. "Perhaps you should try another night," George said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I can't promise you'll find the atmosphere here comfortable." Lauren pulled her arm away and turned to Julian. "Julian, I don't want to spend our anniversary fighting," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe we should go." Julian's jaw tightened. "No, we're staying, Lauren. We're not going to let him, or anyone else, decide where we're welcome." They held their ground, undeterred, and the tension in the room grew thicker as George turned on his heel, visibly frustrated. This would be a night no one at Stanton's grill would soon forget. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, her gaze dropping to the floor as she tried to shake off the hurt from George's words. The celebration she had envisioned, a warm, joyful evening shared with her husband, was quickly becoming an awkward, uncomfortable standoff. "Julian," she whispered, her voice low so only he could hear. "I really think we should go. This isn't worth it." Julian turned to her, his eyes softening. He could see the pain in her expression, and it twisted his heart. But he also felt a deep sense of resolve. For years, they had worked hard to build their lives, to reach a place where they could enjoy their success without judgment. He was tired of being told where he belonged. "We've done nothing wrong," he reminded her gently. "This is our night, Lauren. If we leave, we let him win." Lauren gave him a small, reluctant nod, her gaze still shadowed by doubt. She took a deep breath and lifted her chin. "You're right. I just hate feeling like this, like we're out of place." Julian took her hand, squeezing it softly. "We're not out of place. If anyone is, it's him." Across the room, George had returned to his post by the bar, glancing their way now and then, his expression growing darker each time. Julian could tell that George was unaccustomed to being challenged, to anyone standing up to him so directly. And Julian felt a spark of satisfaction knowing that they were disrupting his narrow vision of how things should be. As they sat down again, determined to remain, a young waiter named Alex discreetly approached. "I'll be your server tonight," he said softly, glancing nervously toward George. "And a happy anniversary." It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. George watched from a distance, his fists clenching as he noticed Alex serving Julian and Lauren. He felt his control slipping. The couple's defiance unnerved him, and he resented the fact that his authority was being questioned in his own restaurant. He stormed over to the bar, calling Alex to his side with a sharp gesture. "What do you think you're doing?" "Serving them," he hissed, casting a disdainful look in Julian and Lauren's direction. Alex shifted uncomfortably, glancing down before meeting George's eyes. "They're customers, Mr. Stanton. They have a reservation, and I didn't see any reason not to serve them." George's jaw tightened, his face turning red. "Don't presume to tell me how to run my establishment," he snapped. "I don't care what their reservation says. People come here to enjoy a certain experience. That doesn't include catering to just anyone." Alex, younger and newer to the restaurant, was visibly uncomfortable but determined. He had overheard enough of George's outburst to understand exactly what was happening. It disgusted him. He knew he couldn't change George's views, but he was also unwilling to contribute to the mistreatment of a couple simply enjoying a special night. "Mr. Stanton," Alex replied carefully, "I believe they're just here to have dinner. I can handle their table, and I don't think it'll disrupt anyone else." George let out a sharp exhale, fuming. "Fine, but I'll be watching, and if this goes sideways, it's on you," he snarled, dismissing Alex with a glare. Alex returned to the table, forcing a reassuring smile for Julian and Lauren. Meanwhile, George's frustration simmered beneath the surface. Tonight was not going according to plan, and he wasn't prepared for what was yet to unfold. Alex returned to Julian and Lauren's table, visibly nervous but trying to remain composed. He placed menus in front of them and offered a polite, apologetic smile. "Thank you for your patience," he said quietly. "I'll be taking care of you tonight. If there's anything special you'd like to order, just let me know." Julian glanced at Lauren, whose expression softened at the kindness of this young waiter. She leaned forward slightly, a warm smile on her face. "Thank you, Alex. We really appreciate it," she replied, her voice sincere. Alex nodded, visibly relieved. He knew George was watching him like a hawk, but he couldn't ignore his own conscience. The couple seemed kind, dignified, and undeserving of the rude treatment they'd received. He resolved to make their experience as enjoyable as possible, hoping to bring some comfort to their evening. As he took their orders, Alex felt a small sense of rebellion growing within him. Serving them wasn't just a job at this point. It felt like a small act of defiance against the prejudice he'd witnessed from his boss. For a brief moment, he almost forgot George's cold stare from across the room. Once Alex departed to place their orders, Lauren sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Well, at least someone here is decent," she said, grateful for Alex's kindness. Julian nodded, his face softening as well. "It's a reminder that not everyone thinks like George," Julian said. "Sometimes it only takes one person to make a difference, even if it's just a small gesture." They shared a quiet smile, their spirits lifted by the kindness of a stranger. Alex's simple act had restored a bit of joy to their night, and they clung to it, knowing they deserved to be here, just like anyone else. As Julian and Lauren enjoyed their meal, they settled into a quieter conversation, thankful for Alex's kindness and his steady, attentive service. The initial tension began to lift, and Julian leaned in closer to Lauren, a subtle smile on his face. "You know," he said, his voice low and confidential, "there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Tonight seemed like a good time to bring it up." Lauren looked at him, intrigued. "Oh, should I be worried or excited?" Julian chuckled. "I think excited might be more fitting," he replied, taking her hand in his. "I've been looking to expand my investments, and I'm considering acquiring a restaurant chain. As it turns out, Stanton's Grill is part of that chain." Lauren's eyes widened in surprise, glancing around the restaurant. "You're serious? You're thinking about buying the chain that owns this place?" He nodded. "I've been in discussions for a while. I didn't expect tonight to be like this, but yes, I could be the new owner of Stanton's and its associated locations if the deal goes through." Lauren smiled slowly, understanding the poetic justice of the situation. "So, if all goes well, George will find himself working under a new boss, a boss who might have higher standards for respect and inclusivity." Julian squeezed her hand. "Exactly. I don't just want to own another business. I want to make a difference. No one deserves to feel the way he tried to make us feel tonight." The thought filled Lauren with renewed pride and admiration for her husband. She felt the power of what they were about to do. Not just a business acquisition, but a step toward creating a more welcoming place for everyone. As they finished their meal, George remained oblivious to the irony unfolding right under his nose. As Julian and Lauren finished their meal, Alex returned to clear their plates. While they exchanged polite conversation, he couldn't help but overhear snippets of their discussion about Julian's potential purchase of the restaurant chain. The young waiter paused, his ears perking up as he realized the significance of what Julian was saying. "So, you're really going to go through with it?" Lauren asked, her voice tinged with excitement. Julian nodded, a subtle smile on his face. "Yes, I think it's time to make this place, and the others in the chain, into establishments everyone can enjoy, without prejudice." Alex's eyes widened as the realization sank in. Julian was no ordinary customer. He was a man with influence, a man who could potentially change the entire environment of Stanton's Grill. In that moment, Alex felt a rush of hope and vindication. George's bigotry wouldn't go unchecked forever. As Alex cleared the last of the dishes, he leaned in slightly and whispered, "Thank you, sir. You have no idea how much this means to hear." Julian looked up, momentarily surprised, and then offered a warm smile. "I appreciate your kindness, Alex. People like you are exactly why this kind of change is needed." Just then, George spotted Alex lingering at their table and strode over, his face a mask of irritation. "What's the holdup here, Alex?" he barked, casting a disdainful glance toward Julian and Lauren. "I was just thanking the Blakes, sir," Alex replied, holding his ground, "for choosing to dine with us tonight." George narrowed his eyes, but Julian met his gaze with calm authority. "Thank you, Alex. We look forward to our next visit." George walked away, visibly bristling, while Alex returned to the kitchen, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He had a feeling that things were about to change for everyone. George paced near the bar, his irritation simmering as he watched Julian and Lauren's table from a distance. He still couldn't understand why they hadn't simply left after his thinly veiled dismissal. Their defiance annoyed him, but he told himself they'd be gone soon enough. But something Alex said lingered in his mind. The way he had thanked the couple seemed odd, as though their visit meant more than just an ordinary dining experience. George couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the Blakes than he had assumed. He decided to ask a few quiet questions among his staff, hoping to gain insight into who these people really were. "Do you know anything about that couple?" George asked one of his senior servers, nodding discreetly toward Julian and Lauren's table. "The Blakes, I think they said their name was—" The server hesitated, unsure of what George was fishing for. "I don't know much, Mr. Stanton, but I did hear that he's pretty well off. A business person, I think." George scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. But then another whisper from a passing employee caught his attention. "I heard he's planning to buy into the chain." George froze, his mind racing as he tried to process the possibility. If the man dining at his restaurant truly was a potential buyer, it would mean his entire business, his entire legacy, could fall into Julian's hands. The realization hit him like a slap, and his heart sank. He had made a grave error, one that could cost him everything he'd worked for. George's gaze shifted back to Julian, now fully aware of the consequences of his actions. His pride had blinded him, and it was only now, as he felt control slipping away, that he began to understand the gravity of what he'd done. George took a deep breath, attempting to steady his nerves as he approached Julian and Lauren's table. His mind was racing with panic, but he forced a smile, hoping he could salvage the situation with a sincere-sounding apology. If Julian was, in fact, planning to buy the restaurant chain, then George needed to do everything in his power to regain his favor. "Mr. Blake," he began, his voice a bit too eager, "I just wanted to say, I'm terribly sorry if there was any misunderstanding earlier. We value all of our guests here, and I hope you can forgive any unintentional discomfort." Julian looked up, his expression calm but firm, giving George no hint of sympathy. Lauren's gaze was similarly cool as she watched George's awkward attempt at redemption. Julian remained silent for a moment, allowing the discomfort to hang in the air before he finally responded. "Mr. Stanton, let's not pretend this was a misunderstanding," he said quietly. "We both know exactly what happened here tonight." George swallowed, his forced smile faltering. I assure you, that's not how I intended it to come across. I was just under pressure, you see." Lauren leaned forward, her tone measured. "Pressure doesn't justify prejudice, Mr. Stanton. We came here to enjoy a night together, and you did everything possible to make us feel unwelcome." George's face reddened, his discomfort now plain for all to see. He stammered, grasping for words that wouldn't come. He realized that his attempt at damage control was crumbling. Julian looked at him directly. "Thank you for the apology, Mr. Stanton, but it's too late. Some things can't be undone." With that, Julian and Lauren rose from their seats, leaving George standing in stunned silence. His power was slipping, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Julian and Lauren stepped out of Stanton's grill, the cool night air filling their lungs as they left the tension of the restaurant behind. George's hollow apology echoed in their minds, but they both knew it was insincere, a desperate attempt to salvage his position. Julian held Lauren's hand as they walked, both reflecting on the evening's events. "This place has so much potential," Lauren said softly, glancing back at the restaurant. "It could be a beautiful space if it were managed with respect for everyone." Julian nodded thoughtfully. "I agree. The building, the location, even the reputation could be something special if not tainted by someone like George." He paused, then looked at Lauren, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I think I'm ready to make the decision. I'm going to move forward with the acquisition of the chain." Lauren's face lit up with pride. She knew Julian wasn't just doing this as a business decision. It was about something greater, transforming a place marred by exclusion into a welcoming environment where people of all backgrounds could feel at home. She squeezed his hand, offering her full support. The following morning, Julian contacted the board of directors for the restaurant chain, finalizing the terms of his purchase. When he mentioned Stanton's Grill specifically, he made it clear that there would be changes in management. George Stanton's time at the restaurant would come to an end. That evening, Julian reflected on his decision. This was more than a business deal. It was about setting a new standard, one that would echo through the entire community. Stanton's Grill, and every location connected to it, would no longer be places of exclusion. Instead, they would symbolize dignity, respect, and progress. Word of Julian's acquisition spread quickly. The regular patrons of Stanton's Grill and its sister establishments began to hear whispers of a change in ownership, along with rumors that the restaurant's notorious owner, George Stanton, would no longer be part of the management team. Some were surprised, others indifferent, but many were quietly relieved. George's reputation for having a selective view of acceptable clientele had left a sour taste for too many people over the years. For George, however, the news hit like a punch to the gut. He had spent years building Stanton's Grill, investing his energy and pride into what he considered a legacy. But now his reputation was crumbling. People who had once treated him with respect began to avoid him, while some employees and patrons openly shared their relief that he would no longer be in charge. His treatment of Julian and Lauren had spread through the community, coloring public opinion against him. Unable to accept the loss, George tried to negotiate with Julian, reaching out to offer concessions, apologies, anything that might save his role. But Julian remained resolute. The deal was already done, and George's presence was no longer welcome. Stanton's Grill would have a new face, a new spirit, and a new leader, one committed to creating a place of respect and inclusivity. Humiliated, George packed up his office, watching the restaurant he'd once ruled slip out of his control. His pride had cost him everything, and he had no one to blame but himself. As he left Stanton's Grill for the last time, he couldn't shake the bitterness that filled him. In trying to keep people like Julian and Lauren out, he had only succeeded in losing everything he held dear. With George Stanton gone, Julian wasted no time in implementing his vision for the newly acquired restaurant. The first step was rebranding Stanton's Grill, renaming it the Blake House, a tribute to both his family's name and the welcoming atmosphere he wanted to create. The name change was followed by a complete overhaul of the restaurant's policies, focusing on inclusivity and respect. Julian hired a diverse team of managers and staff members, each dedicated to upholding the new values. He emphasized that every guest was welcome and that the restaurant's priority was making everyone feel valued and respected. Training sessions on cultural awareness and hospitality were held, ensuring that the Blake House would be known for its warmth and professionalism. The physical transformation was just as important. Julian and Lauren worked together to redecorate the interior, creating an inviting ambience that reflected the blend of elegance and comfort they envisioned. The dark, overly formal decor of the past was replaced with warm lighting, comfortable seating, and art pieces celebrating the diversity and vibrancy of the community. Word of the changes spread quickly. Regular patrons were curious, while new guests were eager to experience the new establishment. Some of George's old customers initially stayed away, resentful of the change, but over time, even they were drawn back by the Blake House's rising reputation for great food, welcoming service, and an atmosphere that felt like home. The Blake House quickly became a beloved part of the community, a symbol of how respect and inclusivity could transform even the most rigid establishments. Julian's vision had come to life, and the restaurant thrived under his guidance. The Blake House wasn't just a restaurant. It was a place that reflected the dignity and resilience of everyone who walked through its doors. From a distance, George Stanton watched as the Blake House thrived under Julian's leadership. He often walked by, unable to resist peering through the large windows to catch glimpses of the transformation that had taken place. The restaurant that had once been his pride now bustled with new life, laughter, and a diverse clientele he had once tried to exclude. The tables were full, the atmosphere warm and inviting, and the patrons seemed genuinely happy to be there. Each time George saw the packed restaurant, it filled him with a bitter mixture of regret and resentment. He had lost everything because of a single night's prejudice and pride. He couldn't deny that he had judged Julian and Lauren unfairly, dismissing them solely because of his narrow view of who belonged in his establishment. He thought of all the people he had pushed away over the years, each one a missed opportunity for connection, for growth, for kindness. Despite the anger that simmered within him, there was also a pang of remorse. He remembered the confident look in Julian's eyes, the strength of someone who wouldn't be easily shaken by the opinions of others. George had envied that confidence, though he hadn't admitted it to himself at the time. Now, standing outside what was once his own restaurant, he felt like a shadow of his former self, haunted by the consequences of his actions. People who had once respected him now regarded him with a mixture of pity and contempt. His influence in the community had faded, and he realized too late that the respect he had once commanded had never been built on true goodwill. As he stood there, he finally understood the weight of what he had lost, realizing that some things, once broken, could never be restored. A year after that fateful evening, Julian and Lauren returned to the Blake house, now a beloved community fixture. This time, there was no hesitation, no sense of unease. They walked into the bustling restaurant, greeted with warm smiles from the staff and the comforting hum of laughter and conversation all around them. The atmosphere was alive with joy and belonging. As they were shown to a beautifully set table, the staff surprised them by congratulating them on their anniversary. Julian and Lauren exchanged a glance, touched by the recognition. Alex, the young waiter who had shown them kindness a year before, approached their table, now a lead server at the Blake house. "Welcome back, Mr. and Mrs. Blake," he said with a genuine smile. "It's an honor to have you here again. Happy anniversary." "Thank you, Alex," Lauren said warmly. "You helped make last year's celebration memorable in ways we never expected. It's good to see you thriving here." Alex beamed, clearly proud to be a part of the restaurant's new chapter. "Thank you. It's been incredible to see this place grow. Everyone who walks through these doors knows they're welcome. That's because of you." Julian and Lauren shared a quiet moment, their hands entwined, feeling the significance of how far they had come. They toasted to their journey, grateful not only for each other, but for the difference they had made together. Meanwhile, outside, George Stanton lingered across the street, watching the joyful celebration through the window, a ghost in the life he once ruled. He turned away, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he had let slip away. Inside, Julian and Lauren celebrated, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and the assurance that kindness, dignity, and love would always be their legacy. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this powerful story about respect and second chances. If it moved you, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with others, and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this. Your support helps us keep bringing you content that matters. See you in the next video.